Hello, everyone. Welcome to Modeler Mondays yet again. This is the 11th episode in the live stream series Modeler Mondays, every other Monday unless scheduled otherwise at 1 p.m. EST usually. Today we've got a bit of a later stream, 3 p.m. EST. It is the holiday season, and so we expect a little bit different things in terms of what we're seeing and what we're looking at. Modeler Mondays provides tips, tricks, tutorials, and an insight into a professional's unique workflows when creating in both VR and on desktop in Adobe Substance 3D Modeler. Now, today we've got a bit of a different episode. Usually we focus in on what's happening with Modeler, tips, tricks, and the workflow that you see when you're working in Modeler specifically. But something that we've noticed and something that people have been asking a lot is when I create something, I want to be able to have that thing look as good as it does in VR. And so I think that has to do a lot with staging, a lot with lighting. And so today we have a very special guest. We have Michael Tanzillo. Welcome to the stream.
Yeah. Hello, everybody. How you doing?
Michael, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. So I'm Mike Tanzillo. I am the head of technical artists on the sales team here at the Substance 3D team at Adobe. I've been working in animation and 3D for 15 years now. The vast majority of that time prior to joining Adobe was on animated films. I'll talk a little bit more about that. And so I worked mostly as a lighting artist. So my job today is, Val, you said that we want to make these things look as good as they did in VR. I'm here to actually make them look even better. So the idea of taking your models from Modeler into either Painter or Stager, and then creating a lovely little cinematic scene that really kind of like helps you sell the look of your model to get the best presentation that you possibly can, to possibly get an emotional response from the audience, is what I'm going to be doing today. So I'll show both a little bit of a PowerPoint kind of presentation with lots of pretty pictures, and then I'll go through a live demo of me lighting up a modeler scene.
Excellent. Yeah, and we're super excited to be able to see like what capabilities that we have when it comes to lighting models and what that looks like. And so for those who don't know me also, hi, I'm Val. You may know me as foxxr in the Discord community. We will be able to get started in just a second. Alrighty. Mike, take it away. You've got your presentation, I see, with your cute little axolotl in the background.
Yeah, I love axolotls.
Do you?
This was one. Yeah, I don't know why. I just think they're adorable. I hired a modeler to make this model for class I was teaching, and and this is just the render I made with it. Love this guy. Anyway, okay, cool. So today I'm going to be talking to you all a little bit about what I like to call the whys of lighting. This is a term that came up with when I was talking to a friend in the industry, because it was like a guy that I went to school with, and we were just talking about like what we learned in the industry versus what we learned in school. And it was all about like, we learned kind of the hows of lighting in school, like where all the buttons were, how to create a spotlight. But what we learned in the industry was the whys of lighting. Why we create things a certain way, why we illuminate things in a certain way. And that's kind of what I want to express to all of you. So brief intro on myself. Again, I'm Mike Tanzillo. I worked mostly at Blue Sky Studios. Worked there for, like I said, 13 years. Ice Age films, Rio, Ferdinand, Peanuts, all that good stuff. I'm also the co-author of the book Lighting for Animation: The Art of Visual Storytelling. I messed up the title of my own book. That's awesome. I also co-founded the Academy of Animated Art. It's an online school for people who are looking to get into the world of lighting and being an artist on animated films. I now work at Adobe. Like I said, I'm the Substance team. And like I said, this is like my passion. This is what I love. I can talk about this all day. It's my main career goal is to like really evangelize the beauty of lighting for films and in your own work. So one of the things that comes up, and this is going to sound very strange coming from a person that works from a software company, but one of the things that happens is when you're thinking about lighting, you're like, I just need to learn redshift. And if I learn redshift, I've seen these beautiful redshift renders and I can make my stuff look amazing, or render man, or whatever the case may be. And you kind of get stuck in this loop of thinking about like, I need to learn this software in order to make things look good. Because you see these like beautiful images, you see these beautiful end products, and you see them advertised often as part of software, and you're like, yes, I just need that. And it's like the number one mistake that artists make is thinking about that just the technical knowledge of a software is going to lead to good artistic results. And it's a step, but it's not the main thing. The main thing is understanding that there's this part in the middle of storytelling, and storytelling through your lighting that is crucial in the process of making beautiful images at the end. So like, what makes good visual storytelling? Like, what are the three things? And I always like come back to these, and it sounds so cheesy, but I like literally think about these every single time I'm lighting something, to be like, because if one of these three things aren't in place, it's not going to look good. And those are creating mood, sculpting visual shaping, and directing the viewer's eye. So creating mood, like this is one that it's often said, but like very rarely are you just actually like come up and you see like actual examples of this. So creating mood, you can use lighting value, position, saturation, hue, color, softness, just like the psychology of color to kind of really put the audience where you would like them to be, like to feel a certain way while they're looking at your image. So these are two examples. Like you imagine these as models, as like 3D models, like similar 3D model, just a female character inside of an environment, but they feel very different. On the left-hand side, we've got, it's very saturated, lots of yellows, very frontal lighting, no hard shadows. She's obviously got this like very happy look on her face, but it's really all about the fact that there's a softness, a light, and very little like key to fill, very little shadow to work with. You understand that this is like a happy scene. On the right-hand side, we've got Elizabeth Taylor. It's dark, it's moody, it's contrasty. I don't know what film this is from, but something bad's about to happen to her probably, and that's all because of, again, it's not good, right? Like it's not going to go well for her. If she's like if she's meeting somebody, it's not a good person. I'll tell you that. All right, and then this was from one of the films I worked on. This is from Epic, and one of the things that we had when we were approached with the sequence was this idea of like, there's these two characters. They're little, they live in the forest, they're becoming romantic interests with one another. And we wanted to create this kind of like feeling of like just romantic beauty. And so you can see there's lots of softness, lots of warm tones, lots of just like glow. We really hammered home the diffusion on this shot. And so just lots and lots of softness overall. Now, if we take this shot and we just mess with the color, like if I just take the color away and desaturate it, it has a very different feel. Now it feels much more almost like scientific, like it's a documentary. Yeah. You're not quite sure, like you lose that sense of like, this is a romantic couple. This is now like maybe a couple of researchers out in the field. And if we shift it the other way and we make it like a cool tone, totally different feel. This deer all of a sudden feels a little bit more menacing. You're not quite sure what's going on with these guys. And you want to, and that's again, all just based on this hue shift on this. Mm-hmm. Something that I talk a lot about with my students is you don't need, because again, like when we were talking about those two characters, like sometimes it's like, oh, well, it's their face, like it's their animation that tells the story. It's like, sometimes it's just like, you can take, if you want to practice this, and this is an actual assignment I give my students, is like, take simple geometry, find a movie and match the feel, the look, the style of the lighting with just these simple geometric objects. And you can see that, like you can create emotion with not much, right? With spheres and cubes and that kind of thing.
That's really interesting.
Yeah, right. Like it's not crazy. And then there's things like the aspect ratios too, right? Like having this like wide cinematic feel can really lead to this emotional thing and like a feeling of space and openness. This is from the original Incredibles movie. It's a good example of this. So Mr. Incredible at the beginning, he's running around saving the world. He's got blood rushing through his veins. Just pay attention to his skin tone. Like it's bright, it's red, it's energetic. Now he switched over to, he's lost all that. He's now doing this terrible insurance job. his skin now feels like gray and sickly almost. And then at the end of the movie, when he's all back to being good again, he's ready to be a superhero, it's back to being like that pinky, warm color. So that's the kind of stuff that you can do with your character work and with your models to kind of emote that emotion, right? Food is another really big one. If you're ever doing models of food and you want it to feel like really appetizing, you want to hit it with lots of warm colors. Like brands love reds and oranges when doing logos and advertising work, and that's because it's a very appetizing thing. If you have blue food, it's weird. Like none of this looks I like all of these foods individually. I like strawberries and pasta and sushi. None of them look good right now because they're blue. And actually there's a thing where like if you're trying to like eat less or like lose weight, there's research that says if you eat off of a blue plate, it'll actually reduce the amount. Like
that's really interesting. Weight loss tips.
Like, yeah, it's actually what you get from Modeler Mondays is now you get dietary help. This is not
not at all actually.
I know nothing about that. Do nothing what I say about this. But it's like part of it is like in our heads. I don't know why. It's just like there's not a lot of food that's naturally a blue color, so it's gonna be weird and feel wrong to us. And we can use that, like they use that in Pixar's Inside Out. Like, girl moves to San Francisco, goes to a pizza shop, orders a pizza, and this is what she gets. And it's like meant to be like unappealing to her, so they hit it with all this cool light. If it was like her favorite pizza, you could hit it with warm light, and all of a sudden it feels a lot more appetizing. Interesting thing about this shot is that the broccoli pizza in the States, it was broccoli pizza, I think, internationally and everywhere, I think except for Japan, because in Japan broccoli isn't a food that kids associate with not liking. I think it's peppers, and so it was a pizza with peppers on it. So one of the fun things about animated movies is you get these regional differences that you have to like make some changes to. Ratatouille, same thing. The food critic, before he touches the ratatouille, he's like this cold, almost looks metallic, right? And then after he's had this like revelation of that this reminds him of his mother's cooking, now he's got this nice warm color. So just some basics on mood. Think about the color, think about the softness, think about the story that you're trying to tell, and using the visuals of the image to do that.
Yeah, there's really a lot of thought that goes into this on the back end, hey? Like nobody actually explicitly talks about storytelling when they're teaching you, like, oh yeah, make a really cool model, and now what, right? Like there's the aspect of like, yeah, okay, well you do need to texture and you need to have those paints to make it look a certain way, but I don't think anybody really explicitly talks about lighting and values of lighting to like this extent. Yeah,
like it's true, because whether you're doing a personal project or you're working on a film with lots and lots of people, at the end of the day, it's all storytelling. You're just trying to communicate something to an audience. And it doesn't matter if you're a modeler, it doesn't matter if you're a rigging artist, it doesn't matter if you're an animator or a lighter. Your job is to tell the story and to do whatever you can to communicate that to the audience. And like for film, it's all about like the director's vision and getting that across. And so it's like I said, a lot of that stuff, like that scene in Epic, yes, there's an art team who's doing paintings to kind of make it look a certain way, but a lot of it is like, lots of times it'll just be the director just being like, man, I don't feel like the character's in danger here, or something like that. Like I need to feel. So it's like, it was like one of them, it was, like a character standing by the side of the road, and it was like a dangerous thing, and there were cars passing by, and so the cars were off camera, but you could just see the lights passing.
Okay.
And so in order to like make it feel like the character might be in more danger, we just made the lights closer and brighter. So just like there were no actual cars there, but it just like felt like there were cars zipping past somebody very closely.
Oh, it's interesting. It's almost like a subconscious, like because people are like subconsciously aware of their environments, the same thing comes across when you're actually like showing it in an orchestrated way in 3D.
Yeah. Like another one was like chase sequences. If they were running through the forest, and like we had light and dark patches, and as we built tension in the scene, we narrowed the distance between those light and dark patches so they happened faster. So it was almost like a rhythm. Because it was like like light dark, light dark, light dark, light dark, light dark. Like as the bad guy got closer, it was like and like. And then after something happened, I always forget the stories. But like after the bad guy went away, this is an Epic. We did this after they were called boggins. After the boggin, I forget what happened to them that made them go away. We slowed that pace back down, and like then the characters were in more of a comfort zone.
Okay.
So okay. So this next one is probably more important to people who are building sculpts and building models, and that's like creating visual shaping, because this is the light to dark fall off across an object to add a sense of volume. Because whether it's a film or you're posting it to ArtStation or social media, you're presenting this in a two-dimensional medium, right? Like it's a screen, it's flat. So how do we communicate a three-dimensional world and three-dimensional space inside of this flat medium? And there's light to dark fall off. I just slapped my own microphone. Sorry about that. I talk too much with my hands. Okay. And it's this idea of like creating fall off and creating shaping in it. And it's really interesting because you have the side of the object where light is hitting it. And that's going to be obviously the brightest, most illuminated part. And then you're going to kind of fall off, and there's going to be halftones and then core shadows. And then underneath it, it actually is not the darkest. It's like, because that's actually where light's bouncing up from underneath. So that's an interesting one. Somebody that is referenced a lot in terms of shaping outside of 3D is Rembrandt. And that's because created this incredible system. The Dutch Renaissance painters were incredible about like light to dark fall off, shaping across the forehead, across the nose, the chin, like really getting a sense of this, to the point where they actually coined a phrase called Rembrandt lighting. And Rembrandt lighting on characters is very, it kind of has a telltale sign, and that's this little triangle on the opposite side. So I got light coming in this way, it scrapes across my nose, creates a little triangle here. And you can see it in lots of films. Like there's triangle on the screen left side. The Statue of Liberty's got a little triangle. It's not always the case because you need a certain nose structure to make it happen. But you can get this sense of like light to dark fall off shaping across it. Or in this case, this is also like a cool to warm shaping. The idea is that no matter what the scene is, even if it's a flat wall in a white room, you can look up at your own ceiling or the walls in the room that you're in. In the real world, light value, it never like stays consistent for too long. That's when things start to look CG, is when they're like too flat, too consistent, too basic. You need this like complexity in it. So one thing I like to, there's a newer addition to this. So the last film that I worked on had a actually the last couple films had dark-skinned lead characters. And so we learned techniques for lighting dark-skinned characters that are different than like this traditional Rembrandt lighting, because if you push, because this is all about like pushing light value onto a character and creating light to dark from one side to the other. If you do that for dark-skinned anything, like objects, characters, whatever, like for dark-skinned characters, it was all about like that overlights them. And it pushes too much light on them and takes them off of their hero color. So like this was a thing that happened for years and years and years and years in early photography, because film was calibrated and printing process were calibrated for lighter skins and skin tones. And so dark-skinned people just, it ended up looking washed out and not right at all. And a lot of this was, Kodak had this system of calibrating printers with this Shirley card, and they always had a different model to represent the like ideal skin tone for matching, and it was always like a white model. So it was always, the calibration was never there to properly capture darker skinned characters. And so like you would see this over and over and over again. And what ended up happening was in the, I guess, early 70s, there was a push to change this. And of course, dark-skinned people were asking for this, but the thing that really like led to change was companies that made wood and chocolate wanted a film that helped them capture the variations in the flavors, like the flavor of chocolate or the different types of wood at darker values. So, of course, that would be the thing that
it is what it is.
Yes. So I think it's called Kodak Gold. Kodak Gold was the film that was developed for it, and then when that came out, it was like it kind of changed. It changed a lot. So now we're able to capture these darker values in more realistic and better ways, and people went crazy with it. And it's awesome, and it's like it's led to this like a kind of a revolution in the way that darker skin is portrayed on film. And I can't show this because this is on, but I would encourage you, after this is over, of course, just look for Ernest Dickerson. He was the cinematographer on Do the Right Thing. He gives a great speech about how he, because he had like light skin and dark skin people in the same scene, he used what he would refer to as like leaning into the idea of moisturizer on dark skin characters to get more. It was like moisturizer versus makeup, because makeup like diffuses everything, but moisturizer kind of makes the specular values really show up, and you can see that in a lot of examples. So like getting reflections in darker skin tone is it creates this shaping again, but leaves the core value dark. And you can import some color values in there. You see this is from Insecure, the HBO series, does a beautiful job of this. And so when you're lighting something with a darker tone, think about it as not so much pumping light into it, because what you're going to do is you're just going to lose that core value. And instead you want to make sure to think about surrounding it with things that reflect in the surface, or and then the surface itself, you want to keep it more specular so that it can pick up some of those values and create some more shaping there.
Right. So it's almost like a balance between like your actual material itself against the lighting that you're using. Is that right?
Yeah, for sure. Because lighting is all about lighting and materials combining together. You can't one of them can't be good without the other one being like they really work hand in hand. Yeah. And if you're doing any character work, make sure you're focusing on the eyes. Like the eyes have a few. I'm definitely not a scientist, but whenever we talk about eyes from an artistic standpoint, you talk about the sclera is the white part of the eye, the iris is the colored part of the eye, and then the pupil is the dot in the middle, and then it's all covered with a cornea that just provides reflections on the surroundings. And one of the things that happens with the eye that's interesting is like when we're talking about shaping on an eye, the eye is concave, like it dips down. So the pink arrows here are light coming in from this way. So it actually is a little bit different. Like it actually illuminates on the opposite side because it's pushed down. It's like lighting that side of the valley. So you'll see this on eyes where the light's coming in from the screen left side here. The right side of the iris actually gets a little bit brighter while the left side gets darker. But because the cornea is concave on the outside, you actually see the reflection of the light source opposite that on the dark side of the iris, if that makes sense. So like this is kind of a structure that you always do. So whenever we were lighting anything, there's so much focus on the eyes to make sure, because that's where the real connection point happens with the characters. And this is one from Rio. Again, we got window light coming in from the screen right-hand side. The left side of the iris is being lit. We can see the reflection. What we refer to as the eye ding. It's a little specular highlight that exists, and we always put it right between the iris and pupil to kind of create that, and then making sure the white part of the eye, the sclera, has some nice light to dark fall off. This is a little checklist. Again, I literally go through these in my head every time I do eye lighting. Is the sclera well shaped to the key side? Is the iris lit on the opposite side? Are each part of the eye distinguishable? Am I able to see the color? Is the color on the hero color? Is the eye ding, that little highlight in, usually it's the 10 o'clock or 2 o'clock, sorry, I don't know, oh, that's good for you guys, 10 o'clock or 2 o'clock position, that kind of upper right or upper left position, and falls right on the barrier between the iris and the pupil. Yeah. So you can see that, like, and again, like, getting these reflections, understanding that different eyes have different shapes too. Like animal eyes are crazy. We talk about eyes all day, but lots of times if you're trying to create like a cartoony look, even if an animal, even if it's like an animal, you'll often put human eyes in it to make it more human. Oh, and I wanted to throw this in real quick. Atmospheric fall off. So if you're modeling like an environment and you want to create depth and scale, because that's a big thing with lighting, you want to bring in atmospheric fall off. Atmospheric fall off is like, as things go back into space, they get more hazy, less saturated as you go back into distance. I'm not going to go through all this, but you can hear it called many different things: atmospheric scatter, perspective, decay, aerial perspective. Again, but it's all this idea is as you go back into space, things get lighter. The dark point always, like darker darks always brings things forward. And lighter lights, saturation changes.
Very Bob Ross almost, like same
exactly. Yeah. So this is this is just looking at the black points, and that's like the darkest dark in each one of these sections. So in the foreground, it's always going to be darker, and then you go back into space, and we always looked at that when we were looking at big vista shots. It's like, where's your black points? Your black points make sense. Are they falling into alignment? And then, you can see this, and even just like simple stuff. And I always like count them out when I see them. So it's like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And same thing here. It's like stepping back into space. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And so you want to just like, if you're building scenes, you want to just do that. Because like looking at the moon doesn't have that, because this is all built based on like the atmosphere building up. And like, if there wasn't that sense of scale of the guy and the rover, you would have no idea if we were looking at a small area or a large area. Mars is kind of a weird one. I just threw this in there because I think Mars is cool. The sunset there, because the makeup of the atmosphere is different. The sunset is actually blue as opposed to like kind of an orangey red. I think that's kind of cool.
Oh. So if we see a blue sunset anywhere in your renders, we're thinking that Mike's on Mars.
My graduate thesis was on doing visualizations from the surface of Mars. You will not find that anywhere because I buried it. But it's
never again in the archives.
Yeah. What's that?
I said never again in the archives forever.
That one. I just misplaced it.
Oh no.
All right, and then the other thing too is like utilizing what are called gobos, short for go-betweens or cookies, because they were often cut out of cookie sheets. It's this idea of like off camera, you can put something that casts shadow into a scene. So like this is a gobo map of just like a black and white image of a window that I put on a light source, and you can project that into the scene. You can really make a larger environment. And where this is beneficial, why I kept this in the presentation for modelers is, again, if you're doing environments, you may want to put some like shapes of cloud shadows in your scene so that they can create a sense of scale. Because again, like without that surface of Mars, I got no rover, no guy here. I just got Earth in the distance. So I'd say that joking, but I literally don't know how much space this is. So you have to give your audience, you have to communicate that a little bit with them by giving them, again, if you have something to give them scale, awesome. But if this shot had aerial perspective and gobo lights and like just pockets of lights going back into space, it would feel much, much, much bigger. Again, something like this. Similar terrain, but just more value in there. And again, same thing here. This was a guy I worked with, Tyler, who created this image for, this was a concept art for Epic. Again, pockets of light, aerial perspective, falling back into space. And you can do this, like the shaping stuff works too on stylized figures. So when we worked on the Peanuts movie, it was all about like Snoopy was really hard because it's a white dog, and like there were shots when Snoopy was in snow. So like keeping shaping on him, and then his white was always a little bit warmer than the snow. Like his whites were always like a little more of an orangey white versus the bluer white of the snow, and then keeping him standing off that way. And then Spider-Verse, they did like it doesn't always have to be light to dark fall off. It could be color variation. Again, stylized. They're still using aerial perspective to communicate space, and same thing here as we fall back. So again, when you're shaping your when you're doing visual shaping, when you're sculpting visual shaping, just think about that. Like everything needs to have some sort of flow to it. You need to break it up. Consistency in 3D images is generally, I don't want to say bad, but it leads to something not quite feeling right. So it's like always a mental check when you're going through it to make sure that you've got some of that going through. Now for directing the viewer's eye. This is one that like you don't think about it as being a lighting thing, but it totally is. So often, whether it's you're scrolling through social media, or you're watching a movie, or flipping through a magazine or whatever, like you have a very limited amount of time to get someone's attention for your work. You may have worked on it for months or years or whatever. They may only look at it for like 3 seconds. So in that time period, you need to get them to focus on the area of the image that you want them, that is important to you, that's important to the model, whatever. And there's a couple ways that you can do that. Like this is just using light to like light or dark. It's like, this is pretty obvious. Like just really look at her eyes. Everything else is dark. And the way that we do this is you just create some complements. You want to layer light things over dark backgrounds, complementary colors, warm over cool, complex shapes over simple shapes. Like anything that makes it different to stand out is really helpful. It's from Piper. So getting this white bird over this darker background. Again, like this bird is small on the screen. If this is a short shot, you may miss it. But keeping things out of focus and darker behind the character really helps. This is a dark shape over a lighter kind of hazy background. You can use color. The one on the left here is like saturated over desaturated. The one on the right is like everything's kind of centering around these warm tones over this greenish cool field. In the Peanuts movie, we worked to create complementary colors of the walls of the kids' rooms. This is one of the opening shots of the film. This is introducing each one of the characters in their own rooms. So keeping their warm skin tones over like this kind of darker, less saturated greenish wall to really make him pop. And because again, this was like part of a montage. It was like, you know, Linus, then Lucy, then Snoopy, then Charlie, then like, and we only had a couple seconds to really make sure that we saw him. From Quiet Place, just like getting again warmth over the green background. This is a promo shot from Secret Life of Kells. I love this because this one is simple shapes over complexity. So the like obviously it's like, you know, greens and a little bit kind of warmer tones in the middle, but like a lot of it is the simple shape of the eyes, the nose, the mouth over this kind of complex surroundings. I love Bambi. I mean, the story makes me cry, but the visuals of it are beautiful in that, like, you look at this and you're like, all right, cool. We've got these possums, we got Bambi, like they're in the forest, right? Definitely in the forest. Like really look at that background. It's not a forest. It's an abstract painting. It's just like,
suggestion of a forest.
Suggestion of a forest, right? And the whole film is filled with such these beautiful matte paintings that do this. And it's a suggestion of a forest, but it's also doing some other stuff too. So the possums are darker, right? So they put like lighter green hues back behind them. Bambi is more orange, so they put like darker, greener hues back behind Bambi. So like this allowed the audience to read both of the main characters here. And again, like if it was like the backgrounds, if they're super detailed, sometimes they can be distracting. So simplifying them makes them easy. Using depth of field, the camera's focus to really focus in on what we want, really valuable. And then like if you're lighting a character, this is from 12 Angry Men. It's one of my favorite movies. They constantly are flapping off and putting shadows on the characters' foreheads, again, to like really, really focus in on the eyes, to really focus in. This is something that you might want to look up. This is a project, what's it called? Like this, the vision test, where basically they strap devices to audiences' heads that monitor where their eyes look during film. And so they did There Will Be Blood, and you can see somebody like as characters enter screen, if they're light over dark, they can snap in on them. Like you can see this in action, so it's not just like theoretical. And then you really want to focus in on performance stuff, like, you know, like keeping, like sometimes you want to focus on like where the character is. Again, like I love this shot from How to Train Your Dragon. Like there's this connection point between Toothless and Hiccup, like, and it's like the first time they're coming in contact with each other. Like look at the rim light around the nose of Toothless and his hand, right? Like that's the brightest part of the image. And so you want to focus in not necessarily just on the characters, but on the specific action that they're performing. This is a shot I worked on a long time for Epic. This is one of the first ones where we were just trying to figure out how the character's skin looked. But for this one, it was basically like this guy falls onto this log, and we wanted to focus in on him. And then the bad guy's shooting arrows at him. So the arrow hits. And then in this frame, I had him fall back into shadow so that we could stop focusing on him and focus in on the arrow. And then when he jumps away, the light remains on that. So it's like kind of within shots, sometimes you're kind of pushing the viewer's eye around the scene in a couple.
So you're actually orchestrating this like all the way from the beginning. You're thinking like, okay, well, if this is the shot and this is what I want to focus in on, then here's where the light's going to be, and then really like pushing in the background. But it's funny because no one actually says any of this or explains any of this. We just understand it inherently. So you're really talking about like the art and the science behind how we understand what story is, and just through lighting.
Yeah. And then there's like, it's not, again, for like individual sculptures and individual shots, it's different, but like for films and stuff, you're doing it over like an entire sequence, an entire film. So it's like, you're not only thinking about how it works for this shot, but like how it plays into the surrounding shots, like the shots before and the shots after. Like Emperor's New Groove, the potion in that is pink, right? And if you watch that movie, an interesting thing that happens is like, before the potion is revealed, they slowly take away all warm tones in the shot. So for like 20 shots leading up to it, it's like it all just becomes very, very blue and very cool. Like, and then when the evil character pulls out the pink potion, it like really pops on camera. Like it really pops off the frame. So sometimes it's like building to something too. Like sometimes it'll be like, like you have to pretend like clouds are rolling in to kind of darken. So this character pulls out the very bright object and really makes it pop off the camera. So it's like lots of that kind of stuff too. So once you kind of bring all these things together, again, creating mood, visual shaping, directing the viewer's eye, it all comes together. And you can really, like I said, like that's how you craft great images and great scenes. And for you all that are doing models, like this is something that you really, really, really want to do. Okay, so now I'm going to shift gears a little bit. And we're going to talk about actually doing this in practice a little bit. So again, in a total fashion, in a unique, probably for you, Val, a unique situation, we're gonna spend just like literally less than probably a minute inside of this modeler one, just to showcase the incredible work done by Giovanni Napkill, who sent me over this model that he put together, these 3 characters, which I loved because it gives me an opportunity to kind of talk about lighting this scene in a couple of different ways. So what I did was I exported this scene, which you can, if for those that haven't done that before, you can go up here and say File. You can export this out. I exported it as an FBX. The poly count thing is something that for me is always a little bit of like trial and error. Like I usually, you want to give it enough to really showcase your model so that you're not losing detail and quality of it. But you definitely don't want to go like super high so it becomes so dense that it makes for really, really long render times. And it's totally going to depend on the complexity of what you're working with. If you have a lot of shapes, like if it's just like one of these characters or just the bus stop, it'll be way less. But a long way around saying that I am that you can that you're going to kind of do a little trial and error with that.
Right.
So what I did, just to kind of talk through my process before I go into some specific lighting stuff, is I exported this and then I brought it into into Painter here, and I wanted to keep it like true to this kind of this look that we were doing, but add just like a little bit more detail. And I'll show you what I did. The very first thing that I always like to do inside of Painter when I bring in a model is I always bake out my mesh maps. And the reason why I do that is, I'll just show you this. So I'll show it to you for the ambient occlusion. So like if you just look at this, if I take this away, we lose some of that detail because the ambient occlusion is going to be like baking in some of like the darker values inside those core areas. And I'll rebake that just so you can kind of see me do that. So in order to create that, you just go into this texture set settings menu, click bake mesh maps. I have everything else already baked out, so I'll just say ambient occlusion. I held down Alt and clicked that to get that. And then I will rebake that material. It takes just a second, especially stream at the same time. And then like, but basically why that's important is like usually these mesh maps are used for generators and for like different like fancy painter functionality. But in reality, I always like to do it because it does help kind of define the characters a little bit more. From there, I added a clay material, which is from our asset library.
Okay.
So so like if you're a modeler, you probably don't have like I came from a lighting background. I have some material skill, but like using the stuff that's in our library is really, really powerful. And for that, all you have to do inside of Painter is click this browse 3D assets in Marketplace. It'll bring up our library of materials inside of the Creative Cloud desktop app, and then you can just search for stuff. Like you can just be like clay, and it'll bring up all of our different clay ones. And then when I'm ready to send it over, like if I want this smooth natural clay, I would just say send to Painter. It does a thing. I'm very technical, as you can tell. It does a thing. and then brings in, and then it's just down here, like it automatically highlights it, and I can just drag and drop it on there.
That's pretty good right off the bat, hey? We actually have a quick question. So the comments are starting to buzz a little bit now about UVs versus vertex painting. And so I think the question is why vertex paint when you can kind of UV paint? And I think that the answer is like a little bit obvious to us as artists, but I would like to hear your opinion on it, Mike.
So, I mean, for me, it's about like, so I always do the UV layout stuff because for me it's more control. So like vertex painting would just be like painting it within Modeler essentially.
Yeah, but I think more so, I'm not really sure from the actual comments itself, but I think when we're talking about like UV painting versus vertex painting, we're actually talking about like what we're seeing in Painter here. So we've already exported, the UVs are automatically generated. Do you see any real like reason to have your own UVs that you would create yourself and poly modeling software as opposed to just auto exporting? Do you see any issues typically, or what's your opinion on that?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So for me, in my personal workflow, I rarely do any hand UV work anymore, and that's just because inside of Painter here you can there's functionality for auto generating your UVs, which I did for this, and it will. If you forgive me for a second to jump into a different model here, there are ways of handling the seam lines, which is what you're going to get from UVs at times, and that will give me just a sec. So because like UVs, like obviously if you have like if I had this round object. What will happen is, let me go and show you on this here. Like if I'm just gonna put a checkerboard on this real quick. You can see there's a seam right down the back of this guy here, right?
Right. Yep.
So like, and one of the things that happens is like you can see this even if you're doing like organic stuff, and the reason, well, I'll put it this way, the reason why there's a seam there is because it has to be there. Like it'll be there in reality. If you're thinking about like saran wrapping or wrapping a Christmas present or anything like that, there's going to be a seam line where those two things meet together, right? It's just inevitable. So when you're UV mapping, you're picking where that is. You're kind of picking your poison on that, and so inside of Painter, I can just avoid that entirely. So if I had something a little more organic, like a concrete, you'll see that I can still see that seam there. But now what I can do is, instead of worrying about the UVs when I'm laying this out, I can utilize a tool called triplanar projection. So what triplanar projection does is immediately I lose that. And that's because we're no longer applying the material and even caring about the UVs. It's projecting it from different angles within inside of the 3D scene. And I'll go ahead and turn up the hardness here so you can kind of see what's happening. And you've got these lines that are here. And that's because it's being projected in from different angles. And I can control where those angles are. I can rotate this around. And then there's a blending that occurs between them. So the only time that I really have to worry about laying out UVs in a very, very specific way is when the only time I lay out in a very specific way is when I have a pattern that has to come together, and I know that I need to lay out those UVs so that in this, because there's going to be a spot, again, if it's around or like a garment, like my shirt, there's going to be seam lines here, here, and here. And I need to lay them out in a very specific way because there's a pattern that needs to fall in exactly the right spot. So, all right, cool. And then, okay, so just to move this in, because I know we don't have that much time left, I do want to do some practical lighting stuff. Yeah. All right, cool. So I've got this. So basically my point was going to be when, like whenever I'm laying out something new in here, like let's say I wanted this to, instead of being made out of clay, I wanted it to be made out of that same concrete material, is I always just kind of start with isolating it. Like I don't want to worry about color yet. I don't want to worry about any of this stuff. I really just want to focus in on the height and make sure that that scale is right. And you can tile this up or take this down, both in how it's laid out, like across it, and then in the height as well. So inside of our layer stack here, you know, you obviously I can merge this in as a color, but we also have the ability to control how the height is being layered in. And the easiest way to do this is just to switch down to the height stack and then go into the layer that's controlling that. And sometimes it's in the normal, sometimes it's in the height, and just dial that in. So that's always something that I really, really want to kind of nail down before I even worry about color. Because the second like color starts appearing on stuff, like it'll change my and I kind of focus in on that. So I always like to take a beat and just make sure that I've got some basic micro detail in there that wasn't necessarily in my model, that is adding to the experience of this feeling like a clay sculpture and not taking away from any of the shapes or forms or anything that I created. And then I'll go in and add some color stuff. So for this one, I kind of like the pink sculpting color inside of Modeler naturally. So I added that in. And then again, because I'm obsessed with this idea of like, you don't want to create too much uniformity in it, is then I'll add in a secondary color just to get a little bit of variation in there. And so I did that by creating a slightly darker color. And then I used that ambient occlusion, let's see, to create a mask inside of here. And I just did that by like, I created a fill layer, and then inside the fill layer, I just looked for my ambient occlusion map that I baked out. And then I adjusted the levels of it a little bit, because again, like by default, it's kind of doing the opposite. You can see the results here. And I just inverted it because I wanted the core, like the stuff that's falling in the grooves to get a little bit darker. And then on top of that, I added just a little bit of a swirl pattern in a slightly darker color, just to give it a little bit more variation. Let's see that here. I can scale that up down a little bit if I wanted to. All right, cool. Like, now let's say I've got this exactly the way that I want. This is great.
There's already so much depth to it now, like which is just those small changes, and that's just the material. That doesn't even have to do with lighting currently. Is that right?
Yeah, exactly. So like it's just getting material in just the right area that I really want. And then what I can do is I can say File, Send To, and then just send this over into Substance Stager, which is our Substance Stager is like our virtual photography studio. And there was a question we saw ahead of time was like, can you talk about like the differences between Dimension and Stager, and like if I'm kind of transitioning between the two? They will look a lot alike, and it's because Stager was based on the original foundation of it was based on Dimension, but it's like Dimension but supercharged. It's got more features, more rendering capabilities, and just let's scale this up a little bit, and just a little bit more strength to it, and also the ability to interact with some of the other Substance tools. So I'm going to close this down, and that's like the real kind of strength of it. Okay, cool. And then in terms of like, if you've already worked, if you're like familiar with Dimension, most of your skill sets are going to transfer over, right? Because it's still pretty much the same, going to be the same setup where you have an image-based lighting setup. So what I mean by image-based lighting is that, and again, right now I'm talking kind of again about the hows of lighting, and we'll get into the whys here in a second. So by default, I'm just going to put some metal on this, so you can see what's going on. By default, inside of Stager, you've got this kind of studio lighting thing, right? And you're like, what the heck is that? I can't see that in my scene. What is happening? And I'm circling it around just by holding down the Shift key and the right mouse button and sliding it back and forth. So what this is our default lighting rig. It's in what we call image-based lighting. Image-based lighting is a system that reads a 360-degree photograph, understands that the bright parts of the image, and usually it's an HDRI image, The bright parts are the light values, the dark parts are shadow, and it's going to create light accordingly. So I'm actually going to turn on my ray tracer here so you can see a little bit better. So again, you can see that it's creating a lighting environment in our scene, right? Now, we have this little, what looks like a sun, and these are a whole bunch of all of our lighting controls in here. And we can just drag and drop different ones in here that'll give us different looks, right? And again, we can circle them around. If we want, you can use more outdoor settings, more like real world environment. And again, you can see in the reflections, all that gets updated in here as well.
Oh, that's very cool.
Yeah.
And so are these all default presets then, just for the viewers who are?
Yeah, and you can import, if you go to, it used to be called HDRI Haven, it's something else. But you can either, we've got more of these in, there are more of these that exist out there in the world. You can create your own, you can import them. And really it's just going to be driving the lighting in different ways. And this is a really good starting point for what you're working on. But one of the things, and honestly, the main reason why I'm mentioning this is that Stager does a really good job of trying to be a really good tool for people who are just learning 3D. And so we will put in these light sources right away. So when you're rendering, we don't want, other software, it's like the first time you click render, it'll just be black because there are no lights in there. We didn't want that, so we wanted to make sure that people were seeing something. The downside of that is that it gives you a false impression that you have to have those lights in there to begin, and you don't. So in order to turn them off, which is kind of the way that you want to work when you're lighting something, because lighting is an additive process. You can never create more shadow in an area if there's I can never really create a super dark shadow on some of these characters if it's looking like this, because there's already light there. So what I want to do is go into my environment area here inside of my lights, and then I'll usually just turn this down either all the way or just like a touch, just in case I have stuff off. And that's how I'll light things, is to have that off, and then just that way I can add my lights one at a time and go from there. So looking at this scene, we've got 3 different characters, and if I'm lighting this, again, the first thing I always ask myself is what story am I telling? Am I trying to say that this is a happy scene? Is this a kid, his mom and grandfather? Is this are these 3 strangers? Are we trying to isolate them? Are we trying to bring them together? So if we're trying to bring them together, I would kind of create a uniform lighting situation for the scene that kind of really ties all of these characters together. Is it daytime? Is it nighttime? Are these panels? Are they posters, or are they actually glowing signs? And I'll show you a couple examples. So let's say that this was a happy scene, and I just kind of wanted to keep this super loose. I wanted to I'll go ahead and create a camera. I want this to feel cinematic, so let's go ahead and we'll do 1920 by 720 to make it more wide. We want it to feel nice and open, so I'll make it a slightly wider, a wide angle camera. You give it some more space, and then we can go ahead and start adding some lights. If it's daytime, I'll want to create, I'll usually just start with a sunlight. And for that, we can do a spotlight, which I can drag and drop into the scene here. And we go ahead and switch out to my viewport camera. And now I can pull this light source away. Now, what is something that we were just talking about? I don't want this to be too frontal, because now it's just there's no shaping on the characters. And so instead, I genuinely, when I create a sunlight, you kind of want it to come in from the side. And lots of times I'll create it from a lower angle too. This is a joke that one of my coworkers had, was that if you were an alien species and you came to Earth and you just watched movies, you would think that we sat around all afternoon while the sun was high in the sky and only did things like early in the morning and just at sunset, because we are always like filming things at those times to get these like
That's
nice
not
yeah, right. So one of the things about like when I'm positioning the light, it's like I'm like, okay, I've got this light coming in from this way, that's cool, but like seeing that these characters are kind of the same material as the background, like I got to figure out a way to direct the viewer's eye, right? Because positioning the light over there is good for the shaping, but it's not good for directing the viewer's eye. What if I actually put it on the other side? Because and this is like this and in all honesty, when I was preparing for this is genuinely how I was kind of approaching this. Is I'll pivot this around, and then the light can come in from the other angle. And one of the things that you notice that it can do now is it can create shadows back behind the characters. As of right now, this light is too bright, but I'm not super concerned about it because I'm just worried about like its position. And now what I want to just, it's like I want to keep these a little bit lower. And drop that down a little bit. Raise this up just a touch. All right, great. So now it's like, actually that's a little bit confusing behind her, but basically I'm just trying to create this in a spot where the shadows are falling behind the characters. There we go, it's a little better. And now I don't have to, let me see. Sorry, I'm gonna quit fiddling with this, I promise.
It looks great.
Yeah. So this is just kind of the way I work. I just like go back and forth, and I'm just trying to find the best way. Like, let's say if I even push it further back.
So as you're doing this, what exactly are you looking to achieve? Like, do you have like an image in your brain already? Or
yeah, a little bit. So basically, I want darkness behind them and light hitting the individual characters.
I see.
Like what I was saying before was that the light was kind of creeping through some of the openings. Hey Val, can you do me a favor?
What's that?
Sorry, this is way off topic. Can you Slack Wes McDermott and just let him know I'm going to be a few minutes late?
Yeah, you bet. I can.
Thanks so much. Okay, so what I'm looking for is these. I want shadows behind them, and I want some shaping back there, but I don't want the shapes to be so complex that they're distracting from my image, right? And what I'm going to do now is, so like, let's say I've got that positioning where I want, like you can kind of see the, I kind of zoom in here. You can kind of see that we're almost getting that Rembrandt lighting on this character a little bit. Not so much on him, but mostly on her. Like we're seeing that triangle come across, which is a good sign that we're getting some good shaping across. We're getting some good like shadows back behind them, which is allowing us to create some physical separation or visual separation between the foreground and background that allows us to really focus in on the character. And then the last step is like, I really want to kind of create some mood. So inside the spotlight, again, this is a daytime scene. I never really want any time for my lights to be too white, because that's just not very realistic. Because I just want to push a little bit of warmth in there. Again, if it's a sunny scene. And then for the complementary light, this is where I'm going to bring in this environment light into it a little bit. So if I start to pull this back in, this is where I start to worry about like what is like my key to fill ratio. And for this, I'll bring in, instead of, I'm not quite sure which environment light this is, but I'll bring in something super soft, something without a hard shadow. And I will give this a bluer kind of tint to it. Now, one of the things you really, really, really have to be careful of when you're lighting is to not hit an object with an object with too much lighting where the lighting is the complementary color, right? So like if I was lighting in the Rio movies, the birds are blue. You never want to hit them with orange light, because then they'll just look gray. And that's kind of what happened with Mr. Incredible in that interior office scene. Very warm tone character, gets hit with a lot of like fluorescent and blue lights, washes away his skin tones, and makes him look sickly. So you want to always kind of make sure that you're staying on your hero color. So you don't want to get too far away from that. But in this particular case, I would be like, okay, if I want this to be warm and happy, I want to make sure that the shadows aren't too dark. So I will, I've got my environment light. I'm making this environment light a little bit on the blue side. And now I just want to like, I can increase this or decrease this depending on how much of that secondary light I want to put in there. So again, like super kind of lifted, bright situations. And again, like I can keep pushing the spotlight too a little bit. Now, let's say that this isn't the mood that I wanted to create. I wanted to create something a little bit more sinister, that's a little bit less homogenized, that's making these characters feel a little bit disjointed and maybe something's not quite right. And I want to like tell a little bit of a story for each one of them. For that, pretend like it's nighttime, and I'm going to use these panels as my main light source. So for that, I can either I can create an area light, or I'll show you a different way of doing this. I can create a plane, and then I will just position this plane. By the way, Stager is one of the only softwares that I would actually do this on, because what I'm going to do is actually use a piece of geometry to light a scene. And I'm just going to go ahead and position this inside of that. And I'm going to turn up this light just so I can kind of see what I'm doing here.
Even just having that much shadow really makes it sinister to begin with. Like it's...
Yeah, exactly, right?
Let me show you what's happening.
I'm going to put this in here. So now I just want to put this in here. Go and scale this a little bit. And then what I'm going to do is I always kind of like start it actually in the position where I want it.
Right.
Where it actually exists. And then if I want to, actually, this is the downside of using actual geometry, because if I was just using a light, you wouldn't actually see the light. But basically what I want to do here is go into the emission inside the material, scroll down here to emission, and I want to go ahead and turn this on. So I'll just turn this on as 1, and then you can like continue to crank this up. And I will actually, let me try my ray tracer so you can really see it. So now you've got light glowing out of this thing, and it's kind of like starting to hit these characters. Now I can do both, right? Like I can be like, oh, you know, I want this to be like an emission setting of 1, which is just a little bit. And then what I can do is now I can start bringing in an area light into the scene, which, you know, the audience won't be able to see. But now I can really use this to drive lighting in a way that I would really want to. So like, go and spin this around. And so now I can either, actually, you know what? It's a little bit too broad, and it's going to hit all the characters at the same time. So instead of a area light, I'm just going to make a spotlight, and I'm going to drop just drop the spotlight in. And so now I want, you know, because I've got this thing kind of glowing back here. I know it's going to affect my characters. I really just want to affect this we're calling him the bad guy, in a more sinister way. So I'm going to put that back behind him. So it's like just kind of getting a silhouette. I'm going to take this outer angle and really kind of zero it in on just him, so it's not hitting any of the other characters.
Right, and you're adjusting this from the back to kind of like see where you're pointing your
light?
I'm
trying to like look like as if I am this light source, and I can kind of look through back there. And now I can go ahead and on the radius there, I can kind of just zoom it in on him. And again, like I don't care how bright this is back here, because I really want to see it from this side. And I can continue to just like adjust this a little bit. Now open this up, and I just want to create like a little bit of rim around the back of him, right?
Okay, yeah.
And if I wanted to, I could then move it around. Like if I wanted to see a little bit more of his face, push this around this way.
What I find really fascinating here too is that even though none of these characters or the bus stop have a lot of like material or traditional material on them, like there's no like posters necessarily, it just is the red clay essentially. You still have so much, like because the lighting information brings so much story into it, you can really push the way in which this sculpt looks.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, we have some questions where people want to know if you're able to switch off shadows, and in what case would you want to do so?
Inside of Stager, you can not switch off shadows right now. And there's no like light linking in here either. I don't believe. And the reason why that is it's actually kind of a thing that gets done in the industry a lot too, is that like I know at some studios that, especially ones that do more photoreal stuff, they tend to limit the amount of light linking and shadow, like, because it just makes an image not look believable. Like I could see there being a time when we adjust that, but basically you want to make it more like a realistic situation. Let's see. So yeah, so we don't, as far as I know, we don't have any, I can turn, the only thing I can do is turn shadow casting off on the ground. Like I can turn the ground geometry off if I needed to. So now what I was doing was creating a secondary spotlight for just this character, because I'm just trying to create a situation where it's like, the light that's perceivably from this is hitting him in kind of a menacing way, where on this character now it's just it's hitting him a little bit more frontally and getting him more shaping. So now this character will feel a little bit friendlier, and this guy will feel a little bit more menacing. And the same thing I can do with the this character over to this side too. I can, you can kind of get away with cheating light in ways that the audience is going to give you some leeway on some of this stuff. So it doesn't have to be like, there are plenty of shots where I've animated the position of the sun over the course of the shot,
right?
And that will give me an opportunity to create some different looks. Like now she's a little bit more happier, and then we can also like increase the radius of her light and his light, because what that'll do is soften the shadows a little bit. And we want to keep, again, for the mood element of it, we want to keep softer shadows on characters that were meant to be happy. So now it's like there's almost like they're almost kind of living, even though it's practically based, like it's based on light coming out of this poster over here. Each one of them now has a rig set up that can be, even though we're not using light linking, we can isolate them with spotlights to only affect each individual character and kind of create little worlds for them. And now and again, it goes back to this idea of like all this stuff working together, is that I can use my camera and position and everything now to tell a little bit of a different story, which is like, before I kind of had a wide angle, which made everything feel a little bit bigger. Now what I can do is I can make this now a little bit more telephoto, which compresses the space. I can do, if you've ever seen the movie The Lighthouse, the Robert Pattinson and
oh yeah,
like they shot that in almost like a square format to make it feel like more compact, like it just condenses the space down and kind of adds to the motion of that. And then we can also, I love our depth of field inside of Stager here. So I can activate our depth of field and just focus it on little areas. And then I can control the blur amount. Now, in terms of like, we were kind of talking about scaling before, depth of field will play a large part in how the scene will be felt in terms of the size. Like very, very small things. Like right now, there's a lot of depth of field on here, which allows us to focus in on the character, but also makes it feel very small. So like in my head, this is one of those, like this scene has a kind of a smaller feel to it just by when I was thinking about it in my head. So I'm adding a little bit of extra depth of field to kind of play that up a little bit. And in terms of the like how to do the depth of field is you activate it, then you've got this set focal point, and I can like literally just pinpoint where in the scene I want it. And then that kind of sticks no matter where I'm at, and I can zoom in or zoom out. It'll always remain on there. Now, the thing about it is that like depth of field, and actually our lights are scale based too. So depending on how big or small your image is, or how big or small your model is, it'll have more of an effect. So like because this model is actually like the scale proportions are relatively small, it will actually kind of like the depth of field will be more extreme because of that. So just make sure, like, again, if you have like a vast landscape or a city that you want to feel like a real city, don't add too much depth of field because it'll just make it look teeny tiny. But if you want like a super small kind of like microscopic thing, you can bring that in this way.
That's incredible. And that's all in Stager.
Yeah, it's all in Stager. And then do I actually have this rendered out? Let me see. I don't think I rendered this out. But basically, you can render this out in this render tab up here at the top. And then you can render as like, you can set your preset settings. So like how much quality, how much resolution you want. More resolution means longer render times. But then you can start that there, and then you can say which cameras you want to render from. Give it a file name, a place to save, and then you'll render it out as a Photoshop file. And let's see, I didn't actually render this out, but here's another one that I rendered in Stager, where you're matching the background to a backplate. And I can just show you that real quick while I'm answering questions. But basically, what you get out the door is if you have CG elements and a backplate, it'll render the 3D elements separate, and it'll also give you these puzzle mats, crypto mats, ID mats that will allow you to make any last minute tweaks inside of Photoshop. So if like I want to just grab the lid of this cup and make it a little bit darker, I can do that. Then I'll show you this too. So are there any questions while I'm getting this set up?
If anyone has any questions, throw them in. We're pretty much at the end of our time for the most part. Mike, is there anything that you want to like end off on, or any like last minute tips you want to give people who are maybe more so on the modeling side that are looking to really have like that oomph that you're presenting in your renders? Like, is there anything that you're saying like this is the golden rule? If you remember anything, take it away from this.
There's a golden rule for anything about for you all, if you're creating models and then you're lighting them at the end, I would say focus on lights coming in from a glancing angle, like a 90 degrees to your character or your object, just to make sure that you're communicating the shape of your object in a way that's really kind of telling that story, right? That's allowing you to sculpt that visual shaping. And you want to make sure that whatever your object is on, that it's distinguished from the background in some way. That it's dark, like again, dark over light, warm tones over cool tones, something that allows the thing that you created to really pop off from the scene. That would be my advice. All right, and then I'm just going to show this here real quick. So let's say I wanted to put this on like a table prop you basically just grab a background image or like any sort of like JPEG that you shoot yourself. This is just a stock image from from Adobe Stock. I'm just gonna put this in here. And what I can do is I can just click this match image button. And this uses Adobe's Sensei AI to process the image. It looks at the background image and it's like, okay, I know the aspect ratio of this. I know that I can use this image-based lighting system to understand that this create lights that kind of look like this scene. And then I'll use visual clues in that photograph to place it in the scene. To basically be like, I know where the camera is and the focal length and all that stuff. And now you can just very easily place it into photographic backplates. So that's a really powerful thing with Stager too. So if you have a model of of a car and you want to place it in a city, you just get a photograph of a city, get your car in there, click match image. It'll automatically, like I said, I was showing kind of the reflections before in that metal sphere. Same thing here. So there'll be a massive sphere here for a second. I put some metal on this. You can see that I'm actually reflecting the same environment, like this JPEG that I just brought in. Into the scene. And again, nothing fancy about this JPEG. This could be an iPhone photo or whatever. All right, cool. Well, that's pretty much all I got. I would just say, yeah, don't. And on the other advice I would have for you is that lighting is it can be tricky. Like you're not going to get it right the first time. So keep practicing. Keep being vigilant and just observing the world around you. You'll see little lighting things like the softness of shadows, the color of light, the color of the shadows. I would just encourage you to keep being observant in your day-to-day. And yeah, that's about it.
Don't be afraid to turn the lights off before you turn them back on. Or
Yeah, work on one light at a time. Don't overwhelm yourself with so many lights in the scene. Just turn them off one at a time. There you go.
Good stuff. We do have like a couple of last minute questions, but I think we'll leave those for like a DM type thing after the fact, just to be conscious of time. I'm sure Wes is still waiting for you, Mike. But thank you so much.
I'll get over to him. It'll be good.
Yeah, all good. But thank you so much for coming on. Really appreciate like you being able to show us your wisdom and knowledge on this thing that you're obviously very passionate about, and like lots of really great demonstration information, especially for those who are more so on the modeler side, moving into more of like, I want to make my models actually look good now, but I want it to look like the way that I see it in my viewport. So thank you so much.
No problem. Talk to you all soon. Thank you very much for having me.
Ciao. Yeah. And for everybody who's interested too on, what am I trying to say here? For anyone who's interested on like keeping up with Mike in future, he does actually have a web page, and you have a newsletter, don't you?
I do. So I've got some things. I've got, you can go to my website, michaeltanzillo.com. There you can sign up. I have a Substack newsletter. It's just called The 3D Artist. So I send that out weekly now. It's just featuring artists and kind of news stories and latest and greatest from the 3D world. And then I also have a YouTube channel. You can everything's under my name. It's unique enough where you can find me, where I have a full free Stager course. If you want to learn more about Stager, I've also got some walkthroughs of Painter and lighting and all kinds of good stuff for you there.
Yeah, excellent. All right. Well, we'll be sure to send them there after the fact. Thank you so much, Mike.
Thank you all. Talk to you all soon.
Thanks, everyone. Take care. Bye-bye.